Hi class, welcome back to Historical Perspectives. This is our final theme, Theme 20. Now hopefully you can hear me okay. Let's get started. This is on writing style. Now you've probably had many skills classes in English language and perhaps in your subjects about writing skills and perhaps also about writing structure. Today this is a little bit different. So we're talking about writing style. That's the actual flow. That's the enjoyment a person can get from writing, and also the artistry of the writing itself. So this might be a new topic or a new way to think about writing, which is important in any of the humanities disciplines that you might go on and study in. A quote here: "Rewriting is the essence of writing well. It's where the game is won or lost." So this is probably a common notion, something we've perhaps heard before, but it's the importance of drafting and trying to improve. So the idea is the best writers don't write one draft. Things are not finished after only the first attempt. It requires reworking in order to improve. Okay, so let's link this to some of the other content, and in particular what we did in Theme 13. So last term, in Theme 13, we talked about the skill of telling a story. History is telling a story when writing about the past, and we discussed the basic structure that historical writing can take. I think that week we talked about Truman Capote and the idea of the non-fiction novel and how history writing has large similarities or affinities with journalism and also writing in English literature. The major difference, though, with historical writing is that we are often writing about things in the faraway past or not recent events, and we're also trying to get as close to the truth as possible, which is not necessarily what writers are doing in fictional writing, in novels. However, the techniques that all of these writers might use, journalists, novelists, and historians, can be shared. However, things might differ when it comes to using sources and actually constructing a narrative. Anyway, in this mini lecture we will focus on some specific techniques that you could use if you wanted to tell a historical story or any story, clearly and effectively. So there's lots of crossover to other areas of your life as well in terms of writing. So writing style, the learning aims. We're going to start off with writing coherent paragraphs. This is probably something you've studied before, and I'm going to test you with a paragraph and ask you whether it's coherent or not. Then we're going to talk about transitions. This is linking language, again something you might be familiar with. And then really we're going to talk more about aspects of style and things that you can try and include in your writing. And this includes what I've called story shifts, and what this means is changing perspectives. So this course is called Historical Perspectives. So here we're going to look at the stylistic element of also including alternative perspectives. And then history as storytelling, some concluding points about that and about how you can include storytelling elements in your non-fictional attempts to create a narrative of the past. Okay, so writing coherent paragraphs. Paragraphs are the basic unit of all effective writing. It is the thought unit that allows the reader to follow the writer's train of thought. It is useful to think of paragraphs as units of thought, each paragraph being an idea. Each paragraph should have a coherence in the same way that if you were explaining ideas to a person in conversation, each part of your speech, each bundle of sentences would make something coherent understood. That's the aim of good conversation. So, one of the aims anyway. So, what is a paragraph? It starts off with a meaningful topic sentence. This is sometimes also called a controlling sentence. So the topic sentence, the first sentence of the paragraph, says something about the idea you're about to write about. It gives some information, and perhaps it gives also a sense of your opinion. All of the other sentences in the paragraphs attempt to explain that original meaning. The topic sentence, in order for that to occur, in order for all of these sentences to clearly point towards the same things, has to suggest a probable amount of related things. Now, this is not so easy to explain. I've written here the topic sentence points towards related elements. Elements here could be things. You have a bundle of things together in a paragraph that are all related to each other. Coherent paragraphs are what makes an essay readable. If you are not getting good grades for essay writing in your subjects, it might be because your paragraphs are not coherent. You want to try and focus your paragraphs on being single units of thought. Larger details should come before smaller details. The beginning of the paragraph should explain what's most important, and then all the other related elements should follow from that. Paragraphs should be short. How short? How many words? Well, really, there's not a final answer to that, but often teachers will say something in the range of 300 words, around about there, 300 to 350 words. Ask your own teacher, see what answer you get, share your own thoughts about that. But you will see paragraphs of different lengths in any good writing. It's not a fixed rule. Style is about what is required for your essay and your writing to be more readable. Also, we should mention summary sentences. You can also have summary sentences as well at the end of paragraphs. So here's the little test. Is this a coherent, meaning well linked, or an incoherent paragraph, meaning not very well linked? So let's read it together. We've been having trouble with the family car in the past few weeks. And learning to drive, my most difficult task was learning to change gears smoothly. My parents didn't let me take driving lessons until I was 18. Our car seems to vibrate when its speed gets over 35. My driving instructor told me that learning to drive in a car with an automatic car is a disadvantage. Is that coherent? Are these sentences linked? I'll give you a moment to think about that. And my suggested answer is, it is very much an incoherent paragraph, meaning the ideas in the sentence clearly don't relate to each other. Now, they might all be about driving in some sense. They might all be about something to do with cars in some sense, but it's very, very vague. It's almost like the person who has put this paragraph together, or attempted to put these sentences together into a paragraph, has just picked random thoughts about driving in cars without any sense of how they might link together. Now, for somebody trying to read this, trying to make sense of the ideas, it can be very frustrating. So there we have an example of an incoherent paragraph, and hopefully you can see why that's incoherent. If you don't, pause the video, read it several times, and have a good think about it. Second thing I'm going to talk about is transitions. This is linking words. So what that paragraph you just read did not have, and probably couldn't have had, is linking words, because the ideas didn't relate to each other. Paragraphs allow a writer to develop the supporting points for their interpretation. The topic sentence gives the general idea of what their argument is or what their opinion is on a topic, and then the rest of the sentences have to relate everything, link everything together. To help your reader move from sentence to sentence within a paragraph, you need transitional words and phrases, or linking words, another word for it, that lead from one point to the next. This is about flow. Paragraphs, writing, very good writing should flow. This means it's easy to read. It has a rhythm to it. It has a sense of its own sort of organization. Usually a new paragraph will be a shift. Will shift the focus to a new aspect of the subject. Not necessarily a new subject or a new topic, maybe just a new aspect, right? Sometimes summary sentences suggest a change of focus. For example, but a different factor soon made its appearance. History writers will often do this at the end of a paragraph. This suggests a new aspect is going to be discussed in the next paragraph. That's not necessary, but that is a nice style point if you want to try to do that. Not everybody does that. Some writers don't do that. Some writers prefer to have very short paragraphs that will explain a transition. So you have in this case you'd have a paragraph of an idea, and then a very short transitional paragraph explaining the relationship of the next paragraph. So that's called a transitional paragraphs, and some writers will use that technique. You'll see that sometimes as well. Both are fine. Transitional phrases. So here's examples of transitional phrases you may use already, and some that you may want to use. So first, secondly, finally. Examples of ordering of ideas. But that's quite basic. So you want to have a good range of transitional vocabulary so you can relate ideas together. So you have additions, providing examples, contrasts, comparisons, temporal shifts. This is relating things together in terms of where they fit in time. Is it before or after the event under discussion, or is it happening at the same time? Cause and effect. Now, you shouldn't presume that there are cause and effect relations, but if you're going to write a historical narrative, you have to suggest how things relate, and often that's a case of cause and effect relations. Problem with this is it can often be a bit simplistic, right? Things don't always happen in clear cause and effect relations. Summary as well. So I'm just going to brush over this. You can pause the video to have a look at this in detail, but these are common transitional phrases. Okay, now on to the more substantive points of style. So I'll talk about this in a second, but up here we've got, when writing a historical story or narrative, we have to note that in real life many events happen at the same time and do not fit into a linear story model. So sometimes the story should be interrupted. So that's the idea that not everything is cause and effect. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and so on. That's really not what occurs in reality. Now this book here, The Story of the Persian War, is a fine example of it. This is a book from the 5th century BC from a historian called Herodotus. It's the story of the Persian War, but it's much more than that. It's almost like an encyclopedia of his time in history. It goes into so many aspects of the culture and life. It's a very, very, very rich book. It is a history book, but it includes the perspectives of many peoples, not just the peoples that this author is from. It's an incredible read. Herodotus was valued firstly as a historian, secondly as a storyteller, and nowadays more so as a historian. So that's more about a historiography of Herodotus, which we have spoken about historiography before, about how how the perspective of a particular history changes. So I'm just going to talk about this. Story shifts. This style point includes managing historical time. So sometimes writers will deviate from the main storyline to detail political or economic analysis, sociological commentary on what's happening in society and why, psychological insights, a description of what a person is thinking and their motivations, or perhaps the location. So you can relate events, what happens first, what happens second, what happens third. That's historical time. But you can also take time out and go into detail with other very important and colourful descriptive elements of what the history might contain. Now, it's not just background, it might be necessary detail. Shifting perspective. So, again, we should know our module, our whole unit that we're studying is called Historical Perspectives. You should shift perspective when you write history. The narrator, you, if you're the person who's writing the history, this is you, the narrator, you should give the viewpoints or perspectives of historical figures that conflict, that disagree with your main subject's opinion or your main historical focuses, general opinions. If it's, for example, a history, if you're using sources from one particular culture, you might want to look at others. For example, if you're going to write a history of, let's take a recent war. If you're going to write a history of the Iraq War, you would use sources from both sides to describe the events as they occurred, right? You would take both perspectives into account to establish your history. How much you evaluate those is up to you. And we're talking about points of style when you're managing a historical narrative, when you're telling a story about the past, things that you'll want to do. And I'm giving you the example of Herodotus, this famous historian from the 5th century BC. This historian's Wikipedia page might be something you want to check out. Herodotus, you can see his name in gold letters there on the page. He's got several titles. He's sometimes called the father of history. He's also famous for bringing the problem of the sources to the surface. So what's very unique about Herodotus is, although his book very much is a story and almost an adventure novel, he also discusses the sources and how it's difficult to know if the sources are telling the truth. It really is an amazing thing, amazing achievement he did to bring the problem of the sources, to the surface, to this. So part of his narrative is discussing how it's not always possible to know for sure what actually happened in the past, and that's amazing. And so this is why he's called essentially the father of history. So let's get back to this idea of history as storytelling. I'm going to give you 3 points of style here, just very briefly. Theme 13, we discussed the similarities between writing fiction novels and non-fiction history. Remember, non-fiction is where we try to get close to what we think of as factual accuracy, an account of what really happened in the past, whereas fiction is more a work of the imaginary. So what are some of the narrative techniques that historians can use and actually share with novelists as well? So the first one is character development. So this means putting a historical individual at the center of your history and inferring. So inferring is like intelligent guessing based on the evidence, inferring their motivations. Motivations meaning what they're thinking, what they are trying to achieve. As much, and you can do this as much as the evidence allows. Now, careful, because sometimes there is no evidence about a person's motivations, right? And there are history books, in particular popular history books, which perhaps, well, historians certainly do criticize them for inferring too much. Yes. But individual motivations are important, right? They're an important part of history, because how else can we explain the way people behave at times? If you're a Marxist, if you are a Freudian, if you think the environment shapes the way we behave, you might point at those types of things. Well, Marxists, of course, look at economic structures. Freudians look at the structure of the subconscious motivations. And there are also groups of people called, well, historians, who might talk about the environment as shaping cultures, right? So all of these things are important, but in terms of the most readable histories, the most enjoyable histories, perhaps also the most accurate, right, are the ones that have character development as a sort of central element to the history. Okay, I could say more there, but I'll move on. Plot development. Good plots. Plot here refers to a kind of motivated story. So good plots involves conflict between differently motivated individuals, people working against each other to achieve what they want to achieve. That's the essence of a plot. And history, if you're going to write about historical characters, real people in the past, you can bring out, you can help describe the history by developing a plot. Again, though, as a history writer, you have to try and stay within the boundaries of what's conceivable in relation or following from the sources. And another thing we can do is describing the setting. So the setting includes the physical setting, the actual physical environment, the way the city looks, the house looks, the way a walk through a woodland area looks. You could also describe the social, ideological and cultural environment. All of that could give a very rich backdrop. All of that is scenery. All of that brings out a sense of the past. So you can see then that these three things, character development, plot development, description of setting requires the energies of the imagination. That's the novelistic aspect of it. But at the same time, as a historian, history as storytelling requires close consideration of what follows from the evidence. In other words, you can't just make things up. That would not be history. If you did do that, you'd be writing a novel. Okay, so history as storytelling. So I wonder what you think of that, and I wonder what you think about your own writing. How could you improve the style of your writing? Think about the most recent history that you wrote. What's the most recent piece of historical writing that you have done? Could you make it more stylish? Maybe that, I don't know, but maybe that would be the piece of work that you did when you were looking at oral history, when you created a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs of history of one of your classmates. I wonder if you still have that. Could you go back and make it more stylish? Could you go back and have more character development? Could you have more plot development? Could you have more description of setting? I wonder if you could do that. Turn that one page into 2 page by adding in these elements. Okay, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this course so far.